I work at home for, we do a lot of work on WordPress VIP. We're one of the consultants that's approved in North America. Some of our clients include VentureBeat, the NBC Sports blogs, Research in Motion. So it is a lot of high visibility, high traffic sort of stuff. And it's interesting because it is still WordPress. It is very similar to the WordPress that you download and can install. So a lot of what we're doing is transferable back to non-WordPress VIP sites. And there's actually nothing I'm going to go over that is specifically that relies on anything from .com. So if you're doing this sort of stuff in your local WordPress installs and on your sites, it's definitely applicable. I'm on Twitter there. I will put the slides up and things afterwards, and probably get a link on the meetup thing to them. But if not, I'll definitely put it on Twitter, and I'll link to it from my personal site as well. And if you want to see really how far our love of exclamation points goes, you can hop on the ThinkRooms website because we've got a ton of fun there too. And again, we are hiring, so if you know people who are looking to do cool stuff with WordPress, we're based in Providence right now, but on Thursday we open an office in Harvard Square, so we'll have 2 locations. Really be local for once. So that's actually the 3 of us will be starting at that office. It's really basic, to start with some sort of basic stuff. What I'm talking about with caching, I'm not going to focus that much on page level type caching. It really is getting more into what I'm going to refer to as fragment caching, just because it's, I didn't really call it object caching, but that's going to get confusing as you'll see. So in a lot of cases, or you need a lot of infrastructure behind it in order to do that. So that's where the fun with caching sort of comes in, is to keep these things running in situations where having things immediately updated is not really that important, where you're not dealing a lot with logged in users, that sort of a thing. So you can start to cache and really work on efficiency from there. So this is one example here. This is the VentureBeat homepage, which you may have seen. This is just sort of a chunk of it. And this is sort of a situation where fragment caching comes in handy, because this section down here with these 3 boxes, that is most popular sort of stuff. So that is changing quite regularly, whereas the drop-down menus don't change. So it's not really efficient or logical to try and rebuild those menus every time you load a page if it's going to be the same menu this week and next week and that sort of thing. The other place we do a lot of this sort of fragment caching is stuff that exists on a lot of pages across the site, where again it doesn't make sense to rebuild it each time you load the page. These 2 things on the left, each section of the site has sort of a description, and it appears on the posts in a category and the category page as well. And so it makes sense, again, to sort of render that and take that rendered little block, save it somewhere so that we can refer back to it instead of having to go back to the database each time and pull this up. The same is true with that on the right side there, the writers blocks. They have the same list of writers that they show throughout the site, and it doesn't make sense, again, to have to regenerate that. So that's just a couple of examples of where we tend to do a lot of this fragment caching. Third place where we do this a lot, this is from a site called Investor Place, and what this is, they decided to build their own stock market index. And with that, we integrated a third-party data provider. But in order to build this out, because we are getting quote data for 48 different companies, and getting historical data to do color coding and things like that, it's something we want to cache, because they're paying for each call to the API, and it's slow to call out and make 49 API requests to render the one page. So we take the data that we get from their provider, hold on to it for 5 minutes, I think it is, and that way, the first person who hits it takes a little while, but from there it loads up pretty quickly. And again, we do a 5-minute cache on that one because it is financial data, so you can't hold this stuff for too long and have it still be relevant. But it, again, helps with their sort of performance and price point on this. So WordPress out of the box has two fragment caching APIs. There's transients, and then there's what's called the object cache. And with transients, they're both built in. Transients are more a native part of WordPress at this point than the object cache is. The functions to interact with them are built into WordPress, but with transients, they are persistent regardless of any plugins you might install. So what it does, you put something into the transient cache, and it gets saved into the WP options table. You may have noticed this if you've ever poked around in that table. Towards the end, there are all of these _transient_ things. And WordPress uses this internally for things like feeds. So if you're using the RSS widget, for example, it caches the results that it gets back from the RSS feed in there. When it goes to check updates for your plugins or the version of WordPress core that you're running, it's also storing that in there, which is why you may notice sometimes when the new version of WordPress is released, your install may not notify you right away that 3.3 has come out, or that some plugin that you can go into the repository and see that it's been updated, but that's not showing in your local install yet. And again, it's because WordPress has cached that so that the servers at WordPress.org aren't getting hit every time you load your site up. With the object cache, it's not persistent natively. It exists on the page, so if you put something into the object cache at the very top of the page, you can access the same object at the bottom, but if you go to another page, that's no longer there. And this is where plugins come in. There are a whole slew of them, things including W3 Total Cache, that take this data and make it persistent across many pages. With this, again, WordPress uses internally for certain things that it gets back from the database, but it doesn't use it that extensively. And I guess one of the other big differences between the two, with the object cache, you can create groups of caches. You can then take that data and use it. If you're running a WordPress multi-site install, for example, you could take, say, user data that is the same across the entire site, cache that, and that way you can access your user profiles on every site without having to go back to the database each time. The other advantage to being able to group things with the object cache is that you can use the same cache keys. You don't have to be as concerned that maybe I've used the post ID when I cached one thing, but now I want to use the post ID to cache something else and not worry about overwriting that. You can set up grouping when you put things into the object cache. On the bottom of that's getting cut off. So just that last one that's getting cut off down there, it's just the different functions that exist in WordPress. If you wanted to go look these things up in the codex and see what they are, you've got set, get, and delete transient, and then WP cache add, WP cache set, WP cache delete. So the examples I'm going to use are always going to be using the object cache, and it's because that's the preferred cache for the stuff we do on WordPress.com, and it is more flexible. Again, they both exist, and if you install a plugin like W3 Total Cache, you will get the full functionality of the object cache. So this is sort of the basic way that we'll set up a cache here. WP cache get takes 2 arguments. It's the key and then whatever group you put it into. So in this case, we've got variables that came from somewhere that have our cache key and our cache group. We can check what if the cache exists. If it does, it just gets set right into the output variable. The if statement gets skipped over and it returns it. With the object cache, if the cache doesn't exist or has expired, it's going to return false, and that will cause it to then go into your if statement, process your cache data, and then when you come down to this line here, we're setting this cache in. One interesting thing with the object cache in WordPress, there's WP cache set and WP cache add. WP cache add doesn't overwrite something if it's already there, so I don't use it that much because oftentimes if we're regenerating a cache, we just want to overwrite it. But if you wanted to have something that had a set of expiration time on it, and wouldn't get overwritten by your code, you can use WPcache add instead, and that keeps it. If it exists already, this function will not overwrite it. It doesn't make sense in this example because we started off by checking WPcache get. But if there was a situation where you wanted to generate something, say you were output buffering something and wanted to take that and set it then, if it needed to be updated, you could use WPcache add, because if it's already expired, it will save it again. Otherwise, it'll just skip over. And again, you've got a cache group on the end there, so you can group things together in logical ways. It comes in handy if you're working. A lot of times we'll work on a certain feature and cache everything for that one feature together in one group, and that allows us to keep everything sort of organized in the cache. If we were to ever actually go in and try and look at things that we've cached on the site, they're all organized in some sort of logical fashion with keys and groups that you don't just, it's not the computer just that can read it, you can actually understand what's in there. One sort of caveat with this sort of caching is that you can't have functions that are echoing in the middle of your cache building, because what you'll end up have happen is that something that echoes will appear above the rest of the cache. So where this comes in to play really is with a lot of the WordPress functions like the content, the title. Those ones that start with the, they echo whatever it is automatically. Underlying them, though, there's a function that if you, in most cases, if you put the word get ahead of it, get the content, get the title, it returns the same, more or less the same value. So it's one thing to keep in mind when you're setting these caches up is that if and you'll notice pretty quickly, if you're testing the thing and you've got the content or the permalink or one of those, you're going to end up with that, whatever that thing is above the rest of your cache, it's not going to show up quite where you expected it. And WordPress is really good. For the most part, any of those functions that echo automatically have an equivalent that returns. There are a few exceptions where you don't have that, and then John's smiling. In those situations, you've got to get creative, say using output buffering is usually what we'll end up doing, or caching the piece above and the piece below. That's where some of the sort of creative caching stuff starts to come in. But, yeah, they're pretty good for the most part. Everything has an equivalent. So we've put things into the cache, and inevitably at some point you're going to want to clear that cache. So, for example, a list of recent posts. You publish a new post, you're going to want that recent post that newest post to appear at the top of the list. WordPress provides functions, WPcache delete, and there's a delete transient function as well. It does exactly what it says. You give the cache key in the group, and it clears it out. This here is just an example when a new post was published. Whatever this key and group that we set in the last slide, this would be cleared at this point. This is a really great little action in WordPress called the transition post status. Rather than having to catch all of the different situations that could cause it. So you publish a post, but if you update a post or delete a post, put a post in the trash, you don't have to worry about catching all of those different conditions. What that does is if the post was published before or has been published, again, the old status or the new status was published, it's going to clear the thing. And it's a bit more efficient than having 3 or 4 or 5 functions hooked to publish post and save post and delete post. This sort of speeds things up. This example at the bottom, which is a heck of a lot lower on the screen up there than on mine, there's a third parameter to this, so you can get even more specific. In a lot of our clients, we're setting up custom post types, so I might want to clear the cache just for that custom post type. And there's a third parameter to this action called post, which gives you the whole post object that triggered this, and you can then check, and that's actually way down here, what we're doing. We're checking in this cache now only gets cleared when a post is published. So if somebody updates a page or one of your custom post types, you're not causing all of these caches to get regenerated each time, which is nice if you, as I hop back to the previous page, this last parameter up here, the cache life in seconds. That happens to be a day. And with a lot of things that are pretty static, we will set them to a day or a week. Because again, something like that authors list on VentureBeat.com, they don't update that frequently. We can hold that for a week because it is used on every page of the site. We'll hold on to the thing for a week. Okay, that's fine. It stays there for as long as we need the thing to. But if they updated something related to an author that we needed to clear it out, we can then set up one of these sort of functions to go in and delete the thing and cause it to rebuild, and that way the data is staying up to date. You're not waiting for the natural life of that cache to expire, because again, if they took an author out or added a new author, that author's probably going to want to see their name, or maybe they got a promotion, they have a new title. You're going to want to see that pretty quickly on the site, since they do sort of prominently display that in the sidebar. So this is great if you know what your key is. So, for example, if you're putting together a list of recent posts, your key might be recent posts, and the group is something site-wide. But in a lot of cases, you aren't necessarily going to know what the key was. So you put something in that's specific to a post, say related posts on the current posts that are in the same category as the one that you're looking at, is what I'm trying to say. We do this a lot with clients where they want to show you, to try and get people to stay on the site and continue to move through. If you're in the mobile beat category on VentureBeat, they're going to want you to go to the next post in MobileBeat. But when they publish a new post in MobileBeat, you don't know every other post that has that related, that sort of related stories list on it. So in this case, you have no way of being able to predict the key and do that cache delete as we just looked at. And this is, I guess, one of the drawbacks with object caching. You can put things into groups. You can't delete an entire group. So it's not just as simple as saying, well, we are going to have our related posts group, and when there's a new post published, just blow the whole thing away. It's not an option. And that's where some of the fun things with the cache keys start to come in. And there's two approaches that we use a lot. Yeah, we just sort of kind of talked about that. So this is a situation where we are caching the key. It's a post ID, and in this case, there's also a number of recent posts that are shown. It's highly unpredictable that we would later be able to know, well, what the post ID is and what the quantity was. We want to clear all of the recent posts or all of the related posts without having to come up with all of these. So we can actually jump to the next one because this is really not as exciting as it looks. There's sort of two ways that we'll do this. One, you can put the entire cache into an array and have the keys be your, instead of having a cache key, you put your array key, what the cache key would have been. So it sort of shifts things one level in the way that your data is structured. So in this example, the cache key single in the cache group recent posts contains an array, potentially. And within that, the array keys are your post IDs. This is great. It gets the job done in a lot of cases because you can then check if, instead of having to check if the cache exists, you check if the array key exists in that cached array. And if it doesn't, you rebuild, you add it, and then you cache the whole array again. The problem with this is that one of the things we run into on WordPress.com, we can't cache, a single cache object on WordPress.com can't be more than a megabyte. And that is the way their configuration is set up in Memcache. And this is something you may run into if you're using Memcache on your local server. However it is that that's configured, there will be a size limit. If you're doing disk-based caching, you're going to want to keep those sizes small again because you don't want the system to be working with a 50 megabyte cache object. It's just not efficient. So this sort of approach using an array works for small bits of data. So on VentureBeat, we do this for all of their ad calls. All of the ads, because it's a line of JavaScript, maybe it's 10 lines, generally not more than 10 lines of JavaScript to put an ad together, we're not going to exceed the 1 megabyte limit there because they don't have that many unique ad slots. So with that, we can cache all of the ad calls into an array. It has the advantage there that we can also do some sort of fallback things. So if there's not an ad for the specific category in that slot, we don't have to make another call into the cache. We have the array already. We can say, okay, well, there's a site-wide key here. Let's use that instead. But again, you've got to be careful with how big you make this, because you do have the 1 megabyte limit, which we actually ran into today. So we have a client that's moving on to WordPress.com. They want, their SEO consultant wants a page that lists every post on the site. Right now they have 500 posts. This is going to be unwieldy to begin with right now, because we need to cache the whole thing. There's no way we're going to be able to go in and query the database for 500 posts every time the thing loads. So, great, we could cache the thing. The problem now is that even if we do cache it, there's no way that we can fit the data for 500 posts into a 1 megabyte cache. And if we do now, a year from now when they've published another 500 posts, we've blown that 1 megabyte cache away, we're not actually caching anything because it just fails. The cache won't set because of the way that the caching is set up. So you've defeated the purpose of putting the caching in there in the first place because you're not actually caching anything. So the second approach to this, I really just talked right through that whole slide, didn't I? Probably help if I paid attention to the slides. Huh? Yeah, basically this is what we just talked about. So I'll put the slides up if you want to read through all of my text here. It works in some cases, but the big problem is just the size and your array also at that point, because the array gets serialized when it gets put in there. It's really not too difficult to then corrupt the serialized array, and all of your cache data is garbage anyway. So, the other approach that we take with this is we set an incrementer. So that's this first activity that we used before, but we're throwing this incrementer on the front of it. So we put the things in, and for as long as this cache is alive, we can access all of the data that we've cached using that piece. So whatever combination it is, in this case it happens to be 3 posts with a certain post ID, for as long as those caches live, we've got access to them. When we then need to clear this cache, again, we don't have any way of predicting what time exactly, because this is going to come back in seconds. We don't have any possible clue, possible way of coming back and knowing what that is. We just go ahead and delete the incrementer. And that invalidates all of those caches. They're still technically there, but they're no longer accessible, because in our function down here where we're retrieving it, the cache key we're using includes that incrementer. So if we've deleted the incrementer value, you end up with a whole new set of cache keys. This was a great little tip that we got from one of the guys actually at WordPress VIP. This came from Thorsten. It was really, really a great thing, because it gets around, this is basically the easier way to get around the problem where you can't clear cache groups. WordPress, if it just did it in the first place, that would solve that problem, but the caching system doesn't. So using this incrementer, we're able to get around that problem. And then I guess the one interesting thing is those old ones are still in the cache, but they'll get pushed out over time as you populate it. The old ones that haven't been accessed, they just sort of die off and fall off the back end. So they do still stay in there, but it's a situation, again, where we're not setting any of these to more than 1 megabyte. And with the scale that WordPress.com has in its infrastructure, it's not really a concern that there might be bloat in there. And even in a local install, when you configure whatever caching mechanism it is, you can set limits so your memcache won't grow to more than a certain amount of space, and the memcache will automatically push the oldest, least recently used items out of there. So that sort of takes care of that. So beyond some of the examples I went through already, some of the other places where we tend to use fragment caching, a lot of times within a page, whatever kind of page, it might be a post, it could be a category archive or the home page, oftentimes we're setting up custom loops within there. Something like the VentureBeat homepage is a good example, because there's a loop that gets the 3 popular posts at the top, but then below that we show the 7 or 10 most recent posts. Well, for that piece at the top, rather than having to regenerate that each time the page is loaded or each time the page cache expires, we can cache that whole thing, because if those 3 posts are popular for an entire day, there's no need for us to go in and delete those out. Those are the posts that were going to be there in the morning, and they're there in the afternoon. They can be publishing 100 stories in a day. The piece of the page below that popularity, that will continue to update because that's just, it's the normal WordPress loop. But we keep that custom loop up top. A lot of situations like that where it is just sort of pulled together in custom layout. I'm going to try, if I can, if this is going to work. And it's probably not, because I couldn't do it on mine earlier. Maybe, maybe not. Yeah, doesn't look like that's going to happen. Back over here. So a lot of times also, our clients don't want just sort of the blog, the list view of, that's interesting. They don't want their homepage to be the sort of typical just post list, 10 posts in a row. They want sort of a more appealing layout that gets more content onto the page. And in that case, we're not even using the loop that WordPress, the query that WordPress runs initially. So the homepage it goes, gets 10 latest posts. We don't ever display that anywhere. Instead, maybe they've got a system where they can choose posts from different categories and lay them out that way. That's a situation, again, where we've created, for the Investor Place homepage, there are 8 or 9 custom loops on the homepage because they're pulling from different types of posts, different categories of things, just a lot of different layout to it because they did A/B testing. It was a layout that increased engagement. Okay. We tend to do a lot of this fragment caching with that. Another place we do it with VentureBeat, most of their site is driven off of categories. So we're doing a lot of looking up of category data, and instead of having to go and get category by ID or by slug every single time, we cache those things. We will create wrappers for the caching plugin, wrappers for the WordPress functions rather, that cache it because odds are they've got the same 8 or 9 categories that they publish in. They don't change anything about those categories. So every time we go back to WordPress, there's not a lot of need for us to have to go all the way back to the database to get the ID for the mobile beat category because, say, we keyed something off of ID, or we know that we're in this category and we need to get the description of it, that sort of thing. With those things, because it does, again, it increases efficiency, and it's data that we reuse a lot, we will take that data and put that into a cache. Another interesting place where we do it a lot, if you do certain queries within WordPress, you end up with subqueries, which on a site that doesn't have a lot of posts is not a huge concern, but VentureBeat has, I think, 31,000 published posts in there. And with that, if you're doing something that involves a subquery, that pretty quickly becomes sort of a nightmare. Just not going to run efficiently at all. And in a lot of cases there, we can take that, whatever data that subquery would have returned, and cache that. So instead of having to go and query so that we can exclude posts in a certain category, we will get all of the posts that are in that category and cache that whole list. And that way, instead of having to do category not in the WordPress query, we can do post not in. Saves a little bit of time, and on a site that has a high volume of posts, I did it again, that's actually not slide. And we've talked about that last one already, things that are reused. Those were the VentureBeat examples from before. I guess one thing, going back to the second point about data we're getting back from WordPress, if you're doing things with that revolve around terms a lot, those queries start to get pretty unwieldy, because if you want to find the posts that are in a certain category by the category name, you have the posts table, and you have to join 3 tables to it in order to do that. Which, again, works fine on a small site, but if you're on a large site like VentureBeat, where they have that volume of posts, doing that join every time so you can find 5 posts that are in the mobile beat category because you know that you're looking for that. You don't have an ID for the category, you just know you've got the name mobile beat. Those sort of things, that's also where we will cache the things, because it's cutting down on the number of times we have to do all of those joins. And part of it comes back to how WordPress constructs those, is that it aliases them, which creates temporary tables. And that's another thing that when you're getting up to a higher scale, you have a lot of performance issues with that. And you'll notice we do this on small sites as well, where we'll cache these sort of things like that. It's not just for VentureBeat. We do it just generally for efficiency, because it's good practice. And in most cases, a lot of the sites we're working on, they have at least some level of caching. So this is a situation where we can, even if it's a site where you're logged in as a user, little bits and pieces of things that we can cache is going to make the experience as a whole better for everybody, and it's going to make for a happier service, really, in the end. So this is the example I was just talking about. So this query up top here generates this really lovely query down here. And I've cut some pieces of it out, but this middle piece here, this is what's necessary. You can see there are, in this case, 2 joins because we have the category ID. But in order to get a list of posts in category 167, we've got to do these joins in this inner query. And this came up recently for a client of ours where they were having a lot of issues with slow queries. They were hitting the limit that their database servers had, capping out, because these inner queries were taking so long. In some cases, they would run for a few minutes and just run and run. And nothing ever actually got cached. Nothing ever happened because that inner query never executed, and PHP timed out or the database server gave up, that sort of a situation. What we've done for them is created a cache function sort of like this. There's a great little function in WordPress called getObjectsInTerm, which sort of turns, a lot of times you're going the other way, you're getting things that are in you're getting a post's terms, and there's plenty of functions for this. This is one that's not really publicized a whole lot, but it just gets you back a list of posts that are in whatever terms and category and taxonomy you gave it. And one nice thing with this, it's flexible enough, so if you're doing things with custom taxonomies, or if you wanted to get a list of things that are in a certain post tag, you can go ahead and do that with this function. It returns an array if it is successful, and we can cache this, and that now we can take the result of this cache output and use that in our query. Instead of that category not in, we can then so that function we created on the last page, we now do a post not in instead. It takes that thing and turns it into, and that's not what I want to do. Let me just move that up the page. Actually see what I'm talking about. I can try and move it up the page. Yeah, there we go. And we'll start again. Thank you, PowerPoint. There we go. So as you can see down here, we've taken this big, giant inner query and turned it into an array of post IDs. In this case, it's a list of post IDs that we've condensed. So that is another situation where we're using fragment caching to improve WordPress's performance. WordPress is great on small-scale sites, but there's a lot of these weird little pain points you run into as you start to scale it up. And this is just another one of those fun little tricks that we've discovered, because we ran into this problem where a client calls us, our site is down again for the 3rd day in a row, and we figured out, oh, well, this is what's causing it. There's one way to get around it. In this example, we actually did this for a client, and it dropped the execution time. In some cases, we've taken up to 128 milliseconds to run, and dropped it down to about 30. So it's a pretty decent improvement for them. They're running a multi-site network that's got 70 some odd sites in it. So it's 128 milliseconds on one site, and you extrapolate that out, and that's a pretty significant savings for that client. So we're pretty happy with that one. site's not going down, so it also means I was able to enjoy Thanksgiving and I've got those calls. If it's down again, yeah, great, I'm in a turkey coma right now, so I can't really help it. So menu caching. This is another place where we tend to add a lot of caching in WordPress. If you've used the menus in WordPress, you've probably noticed they are stored as objects in the post table, and they are organized in a taxonomy. So each menu exists as a taxonomy term, and when you go to get all of the menu items, it has to go in and it does another one of those tax queries like we saw with the inner joins and things like that. So what we will do is basically wrap the WP-nav menu function in this caching wrapper. In this example here, we're not worried about active states. So sometimes Investor Place, for example, they have some menus that are static throughout the site, and it's links to resources and things like their corporate privacy information and about page and those sort of things. We're not setting active states on those. So what we can do, we take the WP-nav menu function and drop it inside of here and create the cache key by imploding the arguments array. So normally you just have WP-nav menu, pass it your array of arguments, telling it what menu you want, what the class and all sorts of things around it should be. In this case, we take that, stick it inside here, cache it, and this actually came out of Investor Place, from the cache group there. Actually, there's an extra argument there. One of those things doesn't belong. At any rate, in this case, we're putting it through an MD5 hash as well, just to keep the size down. Again, we rarely ever actually go in and look at what's in the cache. So setting nice cache keys on things is handy if you're debugging the problem. But once we get to a point where we know the caching is working, I don't really care what the cache key is. I care that it's predictable, that WordPress can go in and get it back. And this makes sure that we don't run into some weird limit in how long a cache key can be. And the other sort of funny little trick here is that if the original function was telling it to echo it automatically, we have to unset that because again, you can't echo when you're setting your cache. Otherwise, you would end up getting your menu in two places. It's not cached, it gets output somewhere it probably doesn't belong, and then wherever the menu is supposed to appear, it'll show up again. So with this, that's what we do up here, is we just, whatever it was, we set into a variable, and then we overwrite it to false, so that when we call WP-nav menu, it doesn't actually output it, it returns it, and then we just flip that period object ID to not set the period object ID, but create your own variation of that, so that if you are looking at a custom post type, whatever your custom post type slug is, for example. So this, again, sort of talks through that one as well. And where this comes in, clearing it, there are basically 4 functions. You don't have that nice compactness that you do with posts being published. It's not quite as cool like that. So just those 4 functions. Again, I'm going to put the slides up if you want to look at how we're doing these things. And in most cases, because we're using the incrementer, when any of those 4 actions happen, just delete the incrementer, and you're going to start with clean menus. And that actually covers all, either adding new menus or adding new menu items, modifying them, changing the order. Those 4 actions cover anything you can do interacting with a menu. So next is another, not so much about caching, but sort of this is getting more to the scaling side of the presentation. So what we see a lot of times is the use of the query posts function, which is provided so that you can modify the main loop. So if you're on the home page and on your home page you wanted to show 4 posts instead of 10, or whatever the setting in the reading pane was, you can use query posts, as we show right there, so posts per page to 5. The problem really that we run into with query posts is that since it runs after the first query ran, all of the conditionals, is home, is archive, and so on, and then it discards it. You don't ever use the output of it. So you've run a database query for the sake of getting to a template, and then you're not using the results. You're running a new query, and in certain situations, like here, you've changed one thing. You've gone from 10 posts to 5, or whatever your default is. Not really a great plan if you're doing things on high scale, and if you're concerned about database load, also, again, not really a great approach to things. So what WordPress provides within the query class, there's an action called pre-get posts that runs before any query does. And this allows you to get in there and change your query variables around. So instead of having to do this, query posts, say post to 5, you can do over here, lost my cursor, that's not good. Go. Due to this, now I've completely lost the cursor. At any rate, very similar in the arguments it takes. You can see you've got posts per page on that one. You don't have access to the conditional tags directly at this point, so is home, all of those things, for the most part, will return false because they're not set up yet. But within the query argument that this action gives you, you have all of those functions, because is home is just a wrapper for WP query, its is home method. So instead of referencing is home directly, you drop whatever you name your argument in there, drop that in front, reference it that way. And then the other difference, there are set and get methods within here. So in this case, we're setting posts per page to 5. If you wanted to check that something else was set to a certain value and then do something, there is query get. And again, whatever the argument you would put into your query, it's the same set of arguments again, and this just runs, it keeps you from having to run an additional query. It's more efficient. The other thing we notice a lot of times is that people will try and create additional loops on a page using query posts, which is not what it's intended for. Again, it modifies the original loop. So you could get halfway down a page, then someone drops query posts in, and it may mess up all of your conditionals. So if you have, in the middle of your page, you wanted to put a block of 2 related posts from another category, and then further down, you need to do something where you know you're on the home page, or you're on an archive page, or something along those lines. Your conditional tags are now all messed up. So where you had is home before, you may now have is archive or is single or something, depending on what you've done. And that's one thing we run into a lot. Creating a new loop and then using pre-get posts, or using pre-get posts instead of messing around with query posts, gets you around a lot of those sort of issues. So again, coming back to how some of this stuff factors into what we're doing on WordPress.com, where some of this comes from. The page caches are very short, so if you aren't logged in, you go to WordPress.com, it's 5 minutes. And again, with a lot of this content that's very static on the site, you don't really want to have, be rebuilding these things all the time. It's just not really terribly efficient. Another issue that we see a lot with a site that publishes a lot of content, you're invalidating a lot of your caches very regularly, things like the home page, the category pages. And again, a lot of this stuff doesn't change. Your sidebar widgets are not going to necessarily change from minute to minute. The contents of those common elements, like your menus, you might put a list of tags, a tag cloud at the bottom of the page or something like that. Again, you don't want to be constantly rebuilding those things. And one of the other things specific to WordPress.com, they have many more web servers. So PHP servers set up to run PHP than they do database servers. So if we can retrieve stuff, hold it for longer, and not have to bother the database as much, WordPress.com's happier, the site's going to run faster because there are more resources dedicated to that. And if you want to learn a little bit more, Barry gave a great talk at WordCamp San Francisco over the summer, and that's a short link to his talk. It's on WordPress.tv, where he sort of goes through some of their infrastructure. It's interesting. If you are interested in that sort of stuff, the server infrastructure they're running, it's a fun talk to see what he has up there. So. Database connection limits. They have a database cache module in there. The thing we also like, because it will minify your CSS and your JavaScript. It will, if you want to start putting stuff out on a CDN, it will handle that. And you can do browser caching from within it. So it'll set all of the expires tags and things. So that's usually where we'll start with a client site if they haven't gotten to the point where we need to start implementing caching like I talked about. We'll install W3 Total Cache, configure that, and for a lot of sites they'll coast along with that for a decent amount of time. And then, when they start to bump up against what that's allowed to do, then you do get into a situation where you are implementing caching. On the flip side, if there are very small pieces of your site that need caching, and for the most part you're not having problems, something like the transients, which I talked about briefly, those are also a good option. Because those you don't have to install a plugin for, they are part of WordPress. It stores it back into the database in the options table. And again, if you've used the RSS widget in WordPress, even it's on the dashboard, those things, they get cached. I think it defaults to half a day is the default cache life. And you have that where you don't need to go and install this whole big caching plugin and then worry. Because one of the situations you run into when you install something like W3 Total Cache is what is your server supporting in terms of caching? You always have disk-based caching as an option, but you may run into you don't have a lot of disk space available. You may get charged for how much you're doing on your server, and that's a situation where not caching to disk, where there's a lot of reads and writes, you may not get penalized for that. It's just dependent on the specific situation. But for us, a lot of our clients are on something like Bluehost or Rackspace, the smaller clients are, so doing a lot of this sort of caching makes sense because they've got limitations in certain regards, so they can't connect to the database a lot. We can cache around that problem, but they've got unlimited disk space, so we can create huge disk caches there since they're not they're not going to offer memcache or some of the other caching mechanisms on the lower end hosting, but a lot of them give you ridiculous amounts of space where you're probably not going to max out your 180 gigabytes of storage that they might give you, that sort of thing. So. Anybody else?
Yeah. I don't know how this relates really. How does this relate to like using a CDN and edge side caching, and so how do these pieces interact with?
With a lot of what I've talked about here, it's not going to come into play too much with a CDN. There are situations where we may cache something in memory, but have the references to any images, say, that relate to it, that are CDN URLs instead of the local URLs. We don't do a whole lot of sort of front-side caching with something like that. I think EdgeCast is one of the big ones that does that. We don't have clients at this point that do much of that. So we're in a situation where it is the object caching and page caching of things. Once you get to the web server, and it's protecting the web server and the database servers, whereas the edge caching does put sort of a layer in there in between. We don't do a lot of that. Again, with the clients that get to that sort of scale, they're, for the most part, they're on WordPress.com, or they're on sort of a big distributed infrastructure. So personally, as a company, we've got small sites and large sites, and there's that middle area that we don't do a whole lot with. So it sounds like that's sort of where that might fall in.
So with the large sites, they're managing that side of it? Is that
some of them are, most are not. Most of our large clients are on WordPress.com. So again, we write the WordPress code, the theme and things, and we don't ever have to think about a server or any of that sort of stuff. For a lot of our clients, that's why they're on there. VentureBeat was on their own hosting until June or July, and they got tired of fighting with it to keep the thing up, so they moved on to WordPress.com because their editors, their writers just want to publish content. They don't want to have to worry that, oh, the site's down, I can't write the story, so we're going to miss some breaking bit of news. They don't want to deal with that sort of thing. And for the smaller clients, they're not getting enough scale where we need to do too much with that. Anybody else? Or just general questions about WordPress? I think we've got another 15 minutes maybe.
So, I'm fairly new to WordPress.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of a good example of a site that for WordPress where it does require some type of social aspect to it, where people can? You're talking about writers and stuff, but you could see a collection of writers posting content, and then maybe you decide you want to follow a writer or something like that. Is there anybody doing anything like that on WordPress these days?
Yeah, actually, BWPress, which John is the lead developer on, he's definitely more equipped to answer that question.
So, so BuddyPress is provides the social layer of all those kind of things on top of a WordPress installation.
Yep.
But the short answer is that when you decide that you want to do something that's like that level, is it's so much more of a commitment than just having a blog and just writing.
Right.
That now that you have an audience and a bunch of users that you're trying to cater to, that coming to the point where you want to make that decision to provide that to people is something that I do not recommend that you take very lightly, because trying to satisfy users and trying to have a system that can support all this logged-in activity is leaps and bounds ahead of just having like one blog, or even having 10 blogs yourself and having people exposed to it, having people now follow each other and keep track of each other and interact with each other. It's a whole other sort of decision and operation that you have to sort of build to.
Yeah, and that's where I'm going to build to. I think the first thing is to allow to have a place where people can log in and just at least start giving me content and writing stuff with quality and things of that nature. So taking baby steps, but I do realize it's a technical decision or technology decision. I want to think through it as soon as possible.
So look at BuddyPress and see how you might be able to make pieces of it fit. Because BuddyPress has an activity stream and it aggregates your when you create a new post, do you have a new friend, do you follow somebody, everybody has a profile page and an activity stream, and you set up the profile fields you want, so where they live, what their phone number is, whatever it is that you want, your site, you build all the little things yourself. But the problem for most people isn't just the idea, because everybody's got crazy ideas about it all. It becomes theming it and making it look like you want it to look like. Because making a WordPress theme is relatively easy once you understand it. You have a blog and single and categories, it's all pretty straightforward. But once you have to theme your own Facebook, you have to decide what it looks like when you view a profile versus what it looks like when you edit a profile, versus when you look at your friends list, when you're looking at a group, when you're creating, what does an activity stream look like? When you're replying to an activity stream, what does it look like? When you're deleting one, what does it look like? All these little bits, then all of a sudden you have to go, ugh, I have to do this.
Right, and that's what I was thinking through. I was starting to get me the question: is WordPress the right thing to build it on?
WordPress is the hub, and then things like BuddyPress and BDPress are like the spokes that provide all the little bits of functionality that you want.
It's definitely possible. We've got a site built for the Journal of Medicine. It's a social network basically for cardiologists. So they publish, but they also have profiles. It's a closed community. So they're able to sort of interact in a protected way, but it has, when you first log in, you get that news feed look like you have with Facebook. So it's definitely, that's actually what got me started. I was doing some work with BuddyPress. It's definitely a good place to look.
So how much time do you spend tinkering with caches and trying to get them to do correctly? Or do you guys have it down pat as well?
For me at this point, it's pretty much, I know what I'm doing, how I'm going to need to set it up, because we do so much of this. At first, it is a lot of trying things, and this is where we first started to run into that 1 megabyte limit. I just want to do the array method that I showed, because I want to be able to easily clear this thing, and that was great until when we start to bump up against that. But at this point, knowing that limit's there pretty much gives us the two routes. We can do the cache keys, we can do an incrementer, and knowing what's going into it is really the bigger thing. And for a lot of what I'm doing, I've got a mock-up from a designer or a spec or something that's come to me already. So I've already had a chance to look at it and say, we're going to need a cache there. Or just, in a lot of cases now, because I've been doing this for long enough, I just say, like, yeah, we're going to cache this, and as I start to write the code, it's not something where I'll create the loop and then go back and add the caching around it. It's just sort of part of my process.
So since WordPress core provides the easy functions, right? You cache, add, set, get. But I noticed that you're using some method stuff too. You have like this cache key or this cache group.
Yeah.
Do you have like a singleton or something that you use to just deploy easily cached groups and sets of data, or no?
No, that actually, that example came out of a class, so I'm really big on classes, and particularly when we're setting up, we do a lot of stuff for our clients as custom post types. And when we do that, I will put everything for that custom post type into a class. So that's what that was. It's just examples I was lifting out of the two clients. It's when I first started, I was doing everything as procedural, and then I realized where I really started to switch more to object-oriented was when there's cache clearing involved. It's like, I'm going to have to figure out where did I put the function that created the thing, and what was the cache key I used, and what was the cache group, and there are some days when I use underscores for things, and other days where I use dashes, and it's just sort of like whatever my mood was that day. There's not a lot of logic to some of it, and I know, it's not really great practice. I'm really good about some things. That is one thing, dashes and underscores, I am terrible about. And by doing it all as class variables, like, I don't have to worry. I just know that in here, I'm going to have a variable called cache key and cache group, and that solves it. So now in terms of the caching, with the exception of the incrementer, we're using just a standard cache. We really don't use cache add that much. Very few situations where we haven't already checked if the cache existed, so we just want to set the thing. And it may exist but has expired, or there were a few examples there where there's a force refresh option, where in that case we can't wait for the thing to expire, because if they update a category name, what we'll do sometimes to make things more efficient, if we cache category data, we'll put it into the cache by ID, by slug, by name if we need to, and that way we can just go into the same cache and I don't have to worry whether or not they're all in sync, because it's the same, we just take, when we get done with processing the data, whatever it was we needed, just set the 3 caches inside of that function. So we find a lot of times where it's just that's.
What tools do you use to diagnose? Do you have too many queries? Do you have slow queries? Are you actually hitting the cache? I mean, what kinds of tools do you use to?
One of the greatest things that I've been using a lot lately is the debug bar plugin. And that for the queries, one of the nicest things about that plugin is if you turn save queries on, it will not only show you the query and how long it took to run, but it will show you where in your code the query came from in the first place. Because we've run into situations where we're getting a slow query and we can't figure out what this query is, and that gives you the backtrace to be able to say, oh, that query actually came from, oh, there's this function, and we may have written it as a part of another element of the site that we're referencing here, and it's not actually even in what I'm working on now. It's something we wrote 6 months ago for some other piece. So we do that a lot because it gives you all the information. So that's primarily where I'll start. There's a plugin called WPcom inspect that if I want to see if things are actually getting into the cache sometimes, that's nice because it will, if you turn it on, it's not a really bright idea on a production site because it does literally, you go to the page in the admin and it lists out everything that's in the cache. But if you wanted to see absolutely everything that's in your cache and see maybe you've got a cache key that's off, that's where I started to get more into this doing things in classes and referencing that, because I'm like, why isn't this thing hitting the cache? And you go in and you look like, I've got one next to it and one the other. It's like, oh, there's a typo. I missed an S or something like that. That sort of stuff. So.
Did you discuss the SEO benefit of caching to your clients at all?
Not generally. There's not a whole lot. Very little of what we're caching has any sort of SEO impact. It's stuff that would have been on the page either way. And again, very few of the sites we're working on have dynamic content where, not dynamic content, but a lot of user-generated stuff where that needs to update. Most of our clients, for comments, they're using intense debate or discuss, so that's not even something that we need to be concerned with. A lot of our clients are publishers, so it's VentureBeat and the NBC sports blogs where the article's on the page and we're caching the pieces around it. We're not doing any additional caching to the post content itself. We're letting the page cache handle that for us. So for the most part, I can't readily think of an example of where we've cached something that would have had an SEO effect.
It would just be like page load times, page generation.
Yeah, and again, where our clients are on the VIP, it's sort of out of our control in the first place. I mean, if we're putting the caching in there, and VIP, that's one of the interesting things with the VIP platform. We actually don't have any direct access to the code on the system. We have to commit it all through Subversion, and somebody on the VIP team actually reviews it first. So they'll go through and they'll look at something and say, there's a better way you can do that. There's a more efficient way, and that's actually where that cache incrementer came from. It came from one of the guys at VIP was helping us cache something that previously we hadn't been because there was no way for us to predict the key. And he gave us that code example, and it's a great example, but for the most part, that's not something that we're getting involved with. We're just writing good, clean, efficient code. VIP reviews it, and if there's feedback about how we can improve performance, they'll give it to us. But it's not something we focus on as a business. We don't have any sort of SEO practice. If our clients want that, they will hire an external group to do that.
Do you use Cron for anything? Like WPcom?
Yep. For both VentureBeat and InvestorPlace, they've got a system for pulling in feed content from partners. So we use WPcom there. That's the biggest place that we use it, and we've run into issues where it not firing. But again, Thorsten, who's one of the VIP guys, he wrote a plugin called Cron Control, which lets you take cron out of WordPress and run it at the server level while still using all of WordPress's functions for it. That's the really nice thing, is that we don't have to do any sort of external stuff. We still set the crons the same way, but this plugin ensures that it actually runs every 15 minutes, which we do for InvestorPlace because they do schedule a lot of content. As the name implies, it's a financial news site, so they're publishing a lot of things that need to go live right before or right after the market opens. And on weekends and holidays, they schedule things when there's nobody there, and for them, things publishing at the set times are really critical for them. So that's where Cron comes in, making sure that those things do fire. Because otherwise, I get angry emails from people on my days off. So I'll put the slides up on SlideShare, and you can see all my fun notes that I mostly just blew right through that are in there as well. Yeah, if you've got questions, you want to watch me rant, you can follow me on Twitter. I pretty much just rant on there. Occasionally there's something WordPress related, but yeah. And if you've got questions, I mean, that's my work email. Feel free to send a question along. I'm more than happy to answer them. So.